Okay, hello everyone. This is Velero community meeting on March the 1st. First of all, let me make some overall status update. For V1.9, we have created another patch, V1.96, on February 24th, and yeah, that is V1 1.9, and for V1.10, we are planning to create the new patch with 1.10.2, and we have created one RC release, and but we are still trying to collect more candidates. So if you have anything you want to add to this patch, please nominate. And for V1.11, the next point is the FC target by the end of next week. So let's try to merge all the PRs that is for V1.11 by that time. That is for the overall status. And for personal update, myself is working on V1.11 PR reviews, and also I'm preparing the design PR for a Velero data movement. That's from my side. And Chumin.
For me, I have released the Velero 196, and it is mainly focused on fix some CVEs. And second, I'm doing the code on backup volumes by resolve policies. That is from my side.
Okay, thanks. And Shin.
The first item is fixed CVEs in both 1.9.6 and 1.10.2. The second item is the feature of adding new resource filters. And thanks for the Daniel and Scott's comments. They are already modified. And please take another view. I'm still working on the some test. And that's all.
Okay, thanks. And Daniel.
I'm mainly working on some PR reviews for 1.9.11. Thanks.
Okay. And Wenkai.
I'm going to switch the base image to a new version of this trellis that has no SSL. This will reduce our effort to triage the CVs. And second item, I'm reviewing some PRs. Yeah, that's all.
Okay, thanks. And Danfeng.
From my side, I add two in test cases. And the first one is node port preservation. And the second one is changing PVC storage class test. That's all from my side.
Okay, thanks. And Shichi.
I worked on issue 5576, which is about adding a structure backup describer to display the output in a JSON format, and the code has been merged.
Okay, thanks. And Scott.
Yeah, so several updates to the backup item action v2 controller work. Mostly in response to the meetings last week, where we made some kind of last minute design changes that we agreed to. I've also updated the design docs and the PR, both for the API and the overall feature to include that change. And then some additional bug fixing as a result of testing with real backups and plugins. So just the only other thing with this is that we need to get this reviewed as quickly as possible, because I also have to do the restore side, which is going to be smaller than this, but I've been holding off on starting that because it's going to depend on some of what's in there, as well as any changes, that we agree to, so that once that's approved and merged, the restore should be relatively quick. I would hope to implement and review, because basically the logic and that's going to be kind of a subset of what's on the backup side. It'll be a lot of very similar changes, but we won't have to worry about the finalize or updating tarballs or any of that because we don't have that on the restore side. So it'll be simpler.
Okay.
We'll handle that with priority. Thanks.
With the what?
I mean, we'll handle that with priority. Yeah.
Yeah. Priority is kind of, I mean, we have priority already exists there. So, basically anything that we add to Velero core that uses this feature, we'll need to adjust the priority appropriately. And any user or developer that builds async plugins on top of Velero that aren't upstream, for example, what we're doing in OADP, we'll have to manage that in our own installations as well. But again, that's going to be no different than any other, restore add, because right now we already have to worry about, like, if you have custom plugins, even if they're synchronous plugins, those restore order issues matter, and the restore priority. And the new feature we added, I think it's 110, it might have been 19, I forget. I guess it was 19 to add the beginning and the ending priority list, the kind of the low priority, high priority, will give us more flexibility there as well. But again, I guess the main point is that the restore will be a simpler PR than this. It will have fewer changes. But at the same time, it kind of depends on some of these changes. So I really don't want to start that until this is merged, so we don't have merge conflicts and all that. So that's the hope, is to get this kind of finally approved and updated, any additional changes relatively quickly.
Yeah. So it means for this PR 5849 and except the conflicts, everything is ready for merge, right? From your side, I mean, Scott.
Right. Yeah. Well. I mean, I think I resolved all the conflicts as of now. There were some conflicts. I guess I should point out there is another potential for conflicts, and that's going to be, I noticed there's the backup controller refactor to use controller runtime. Depending on whether this is merged first or that's merged first, there's going to be some merge conflict dealing with that for the second PR to get merged, because since this code is changing the backup controller and that's refactoring backup controller, whichever one gets merged first, the other PR is going to have to be modified again to deal with the merge conflicts. But I'm hoping that should be relatively straightforward, because even though the same code is changing and so there'll be merge conflicts, the context is going to be obvious as to the kinds of differences. So it should be relatively easy to deal with that conflict. That's only going to be an issue for this PR if the refactoring gets merged first. If this one gets merged first, then the refactoring PR may have to deal with some of those merge conflicts. Or they're not so much merge conflicts, but rebase conflicts to have to rebase to main.
Okay.
Yeah, I made some changes today. The util clock change that was already made up, and the other controllers, I realized that my new controllers had that, so I had to change that as well. So.
Yeah. Okay.
I have a new PR up today. This is not connected to any of the asynchronous work, but it is connected to the V2 work. When we built the restore item action V2, we included two things from previously approved design. One was the asynchronous changes, and the other was an additional return field and API method to facilitate waiting for additional items returned and restore plugins to be ready. This was an issue we created a long time ago, actually, that's been open for a long time because we couldn't resolve it until we had plugin versioning. The design docs previously approved. The API changes are already in. So the restore item action API changes are actually in. This PR really just modifies the controller side. So it's a relatively small PR because of that. And the only other thing is that I do need to make one additional change. Emily's PR that adds the resource timeout that we'll get to in later. I need to use that timeout in this PR. So I have a fix me comment that I need to update to use that timeout once it's merged.
Okay.
So that means that PR, I mean, Emily will be discussing in this meeting, that has to be part of 1.11, right?
Yeah, I believe that's already on this 1.11 scope. And I think we had some things where depending on the Red Hat side for our release, it's based on 1.11. So the hope was that we were, I mean, Emily, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we do need this for our 1.11, right?
Yeah.
I don't think she was able to make it.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Sorry. Yeah, she won't get.
Yeah, we need it for 111. So
Yeah, and that PR, I think we'd already has the review process had already started on that as well, and she'd responded to feedback, and so hopefully we can just kind of finish
Yeah.
along that as well.
Yeah.
But basically, one advantage to that plug, I mean, once that gets merged, that prevents, because my original version of this additional items PR that I had again 2 years ago that we ended up never merging because we didn't have plugin versioning, I actually added a new timeout field for this, but it's actually a perfect use of that resource timeout that Emily's adding anyway. So having her PR in means I don't need to add a new configuration field for this functionality on my side, because I'm just going to reuse that resource timeout that's already being added to the restore plugin.
Okay, thanks, Scott. And we'll try our best to finish this one,
Yeah.
and then we will turn to the new ones. And
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
And just one more comment about my availability, because again, we're trying to go back and forth on this. I'm available tomorrow, and then the last 2 days of the week I'm out, but then back on Monday. So just keep that in mind as you're expecting for responses from me, both for this and also for PR reviews.
Okay. Okay. Thanks. And anything else, Scott?
That's it for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm done. Yep.
Okay. Okay, that's for the item update. So discussion topics, we have one from Emily. So come to you, Emily.
Scott or Shubham, can you stand in?
Oh, Emily is not here.
Yeah, sure. Let me just.
Shubham,
So
you want to share screen?
you can open up the PR.
Okay.
It's just a server setting timeout. So basically, there were places in the code base where we had hard coded some timeouts. So in case of large scale backups and restores, we were facing issues in multiple places. So this PR caters to that problem and gives the flexibility to the user so that the user can configure it, and then we might not face such issues. So I think Sean as well, we actually discussed about this prior to this PR as well. So maybe if you guys could just take a look at it, pretty straightforward.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
just to add a couple
quick
things. I was going
comment
to say,
on-
I saw from the last review cycle, there was a suggestion to add bring one more of those hard-coded timeouts into using the resource timeout as well, and that was the most recent change. I think it was for CRD processing.
Okay, yeah, I can add some inline timeout. Sorry, I haven't had a chance to look at this PR, but I mean originally it was 1 minute, but you increase the default to 10. So but I think 1 minute should be okay for most of the cases, right?
For which default are you referring to, Daniel?
For the resource timeout, I think that was it was 5. I think wasn't it before
Yeah.
this PR?
Yeah, I think.
I think that's still an open question. Should it be 5 or should it be 10? I don't think there's as long as it's configurable. I think what we choose for the default is not going to be necessarily a hard. We can, because again, if you make it 5, for example, as the default, then users can bump it up to 10 or bring it down to 1. I know we specifically had problems when it was 1, and so we moved it up to 5. I don't really have a strong opinion as to whether we should make it 10 versus 5. I think what part of that was that there were more than one places where Emily had kind of converged and said, hey, we're going to use the same resource timeout. And I think some of the examples were using 1, some were using 5, some were using 10. And so 10 was kind of the catch-all to make sure we weren't breaking anything. It might make sense to bump it back down to 5. That may be something we can change later, or maybe if there's someone that's, I don't have a strong opinion as to what it should be as the default. But
Yeah, as long
One
as
of the
it's
concerns was we didn't want to add a whole bunch of new configuration settings that would be confusing to users. So we wanted to try to consolidate this and to say, okay, we just want to, and again, this is where the resource timeout part came in, because there were several areas where this is relevant. And again, the new PR that I just discussed for additional items on restore, I'm planning on using the same resource timeout there as well. I don't know, Shima, if you had any context on why we're using 10 now versus 5. I think it's because at least one of the timeouts that we're replacing previously had 10. Yeah, I see the repo insurer will use 10, it looks like.
That's for the repo insurer, but I think even I don't have a strong opinion. If you want that to be updated to some other value, Daniel, you could you
No,
please-
no, I don't have a strong opinion on what value it should be. I just noticed that there's some timeout because we introduced this configurable timeout. Maybe you don't need to update the default one, but
Yeah. I mean, we need to have a default, that way users don't have to provide it. And then the question just is, is the default 5 versus 10? Since it's configurable, that's not a huge, it's not hugely important, I guess, because users could always change it. If they're seeing things are taking too long to timeout, that they really want it to be shorter, they can configure it. And then obviously if they're hitting timeouts that are too short, they can increase it. 5 might make sense as kind of a middle ground there, but again, since it's configurable, you can basically we can have recommendations on the install to say we think users can just leave it as default, here's what it is, but they can always set that setting in the server config to increase or decrease it for their own needs.
So does it mean this timeout will use for any internal operations to create a resource in under whatever context, right? Because here right now I see some this timeout used in different contexts, like creating the backup repo CR and creating some volume samples CRs.
Right.
Sorry, not.
Yeah. The intent is that because the sorts of use cases where we've run into users failing with the lower numbers, it tended to be clusters with very busy API servers. That's just one example where if that's your reason for hitting timeouts too soon and wanting to bump it up, you're running that risk for any time you're creating resources or deleting resources. We actually have a separate resource terminating timeout that we're not touching here that we could consider in the future consolidating into a single parameter or not. I mean, I think it's because it already exists, getting rid of it has backwards compatibility issues. I just mentioned that as an example. That we were trying to say, we don't want to have a separate configurable timeout with a different name for every possible resource that we're going to be, we want a CRD timeout and a repo insurer timeout and all that. So if we just have a resource timeout that's generally used for creating resources, waiting for updates, that kind of thing on resources, it's mostly related to API server performance and the cluster. So in general, it makes sense that if you want that to be larger than default for one value, you probably want it larger than default for these other ones as well. That was at least the thinking behind doing this, so that we didn't have to add a bunch of new configuration values that needed to be documented separately and all of that, and to try to make it as easy as possible for the end user to deal with, oh, my cluster is being slow, and as a result, Velero backups are failing because they're hitting timeouts, and there's not really a problem, but I need the timeout to be a bit larger. Well, they can just update their Velero deployment with this resource timeout set to a larger number and restart it.
So yeah, partly this timeout or this bunch of operations are related to the performance of the API server, and for another part, for example, like this one, the timeout, this one is to wait for the backup repository CR to get into the ready state. So it doesn't only mean that we need to create a accumulated object from the API server, but we need to wait to validate the connection to the backup storage. So partly it depends on the API server, partly it depends on some internal things. So.
That's true. And that's one that you could argue should have been a separate, parameter maybe, but again, we were trying to balance that out. I would say at this point, let's deal with the single parameter, and then if we find out later we need additional parameters, maybe we need one specific to that.
Yeah.
A repo ensure, we can add a separate repo ensure timeout, later if it turns out we have users that are saying, hey, I want these to be different values. Because it's easier to add parameters later. Because even if we don't make it separate, because right now this is hard coded to 5 minutes, not configurable at all. So we're changing something that's not configurable to something that's configurable along with a few other things. So that may not be perfect, but at least it's easy for the users to tweak it. If we decide later based on users putting issues in saying, hey, this is not sufficient, I really want this to be a different value, then we can consider adding a separate value for just repo ensure. But I think at this point that might be overkill, because let's just try not to create too many parameters, just because that makes it harder to configure and document and all that.
Yeah,
But
it
we certainly
makes,
can add it later if we decide that, if users are hitting it and saying, hey, I want this to be a different number, and here's my use case that demands it, then we can respond and add that as we need to.
Yeah, it means the at present we need to select the largest value under different contexts. For example, if this one require 30 minutes, for example, we need to
Right,
set the
that is
value
true.
to
So
30.
if that would be a good example where if we actually hit cases where the repo ensure needs to be a large timeout, but setting it to be that large for everything else is causing problems, that would be the use case to say, let's add another one. But I think we need to see that kind of use case happening before, otherwise, we could create a separate configurable value for every single timeout in the system, and there might be 10 new ones that we're going to add. But if there's no user demand for that, no need for that, then we're adding maintenance difficulties without a clear benefit.
Yeah.
But we can add those later. Again, the resource timeout is intended to be relatively generic. I mean, not completely generic, because we still have things that it doesn't cover, but I'd say relatively generic. And then if we need very specific timeout values for single use case scenarios, we can add those later without deleting this. We would leave this alone, add a new repo ensure timeout, and then just change that line of code to use the new timeout instead of the old one. But this at least gets rid of the hard-coded value where there's absolutely no way for a user, when it's set to time times 5 for 5 times minutes here, there's no way for a user to change that value without recompiling Velero and making their own image.
Yeah. So it seems that once it's merged, it's added, we need to keep in mind that for any operations, we need to try to use this one instead of adding a new one or fix one.
Exactly. Unless while we're writing that new feature, we say this isn't not appropriate, and here's the reasons why it's different. But that's why, for example, for the PR that I just posted today around additional items, why even though my original PR that I had put together that was never merged had a separate timeout value, I realized that I have this new resource timeout that we're trying to get merged. And this is another example of that kind of resource where in most cases it makes sense to use the default, or the same value rather as the other ones. So therefore, the PR that I submitted for that today does not have a new configuration parameter added.
Okay.
But I will need to update the PR to reference resource timeout once this is merged, because obviously I'm not referencing it yet because it doesn't exist on main.
Okay. And anything else on this PR, everyone and Shubham?
That's it. Like we just want this to be in 111. So
You add it to the 111 milestone and add a comment. Thanks.
okay, I added the label.
Okay. Anything else we want to discuss in this meeting?
So I believe Ming has pinged you about his design regarding the volume filter policy, right? You guys have any comment on that, or? I mean, I believe Ming is making some tweak to that PR today or tomorrow, and after that, I think we are okay with approval from you guys, right, Scott and Shubham?
I think I did comment on that. I haven't acted PR yet, but like I said, it was still kind of in progress. But I don't have any strong opinions on that at this point. So I think once it's ready to review, let me know. And as I said, I could tomorrow. I should be able to review it. Otherwise, I can review it on Monday.
Yeah, I can talk to Shubham. So
Yeah.
thank you.
So
and I will go back. The other one with the cluster and namespace resources, I reviewed that earlier and then made comments. I did see that it was updated, so I need to go back, and I should be able to review that again tomorrow and hopefully get that in approval.
Yeah. So
Which one are you talking about? Sorry.
Oh, that was we already had the new design for the cluster scoped and namespace resources, includes, excludes. We had the PR for that.
Oh, so the implementation one. Okay, I see.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. I reviewed it. There was one issue I saw that I commented on that's been resolved already. I didn't see any other problems when I looked at it, but I will go and give that another review tomorrow.
Thanks.
I had went through the design. I found it useful. Like we do need the filtering based on volumes, and I was fine with it. But I had read some comments from Ivan. I think
Yes.
he wasn't on board, I think.
Yeah, I think I talked to Ivan in another community meeting, and he's probably okay to at least we move on with the one by Ming. And I also told him that his design regarding extend resource filter with field selectors probably should be done by extending the policy data structure proposed by Ming. And I think he's kind of okay, but the one that he proposed is really a break change. So I currently don't think we're gonna do that in the very near future.
Okay, like it can act as an extension to the volume policy, right? Maybe later.
Could you say this? Could you say that again, Shubham? Sorry.
Yeah. So what Ivan proposed that can act as an extension in later release, right?
But that I current opinion is that should be done by extending the data of the config map proposed by Ming instead of adding more fields into the backup filter, because what he proposes is a break change to Xun's design, which is already merged.
Yeah. So maybe what we could do is add that as a future scope thing in this design.
You mean Ming's design, right? I believe he mentioned that we're
design.
gonna extend that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll add my review.
Okay.
No worries. Yeah.
Okay. Another thing from my side is we are going to create the Velero billion data moment PR. I mean the design PR. So if we have any more comments or requirements on it, we can still add them into the current design doc, and we hope that we can address as many of these comments or requirements for in the initial design PR. Okay, that's it. Any other things? If no, I think we can finish off here. Thanks for joining the meeting. Have a good day and a good evening. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yep. Hey.